it's Lizzie. Today I'm going to talk about how Catholicism offers women the most bodily autonomy. So this is a perspective much different than most women in this country would share, but I've been Catholic for 6 years. I converted into Catholicism, and I constantly hear people talking about how because Catholicism is pro-life and is against birth control and promotes sex in marriage, a lot of people say that Catholicism takes away bodily autonomy from women. I was just thinking about this the other day, the phrase bodily autonomy, and how actually as a Catholic, I have way more bodily autonomy than I did before I became Catholic. So I want to share why. I think the reason that anyone has ever made a claim that Catholicism doesn't value bodily autonomy is because they're looking at one specific issue alone rather than looking at it within the framework of all Catholic teachings. Anytime someone asks me for the Catholic view on gay marriage, contraception, divorce, abortion, I always say we need to have an hour-and-a-half conversation and talk about the overarching meaning of marriage and life and love in Catholicism, because you have to understand how everything fits together. You cannot just look at one issue at a time. So I made a list of the top 4 reasons why Catholicism gives women more bodily autonomy. Number 1 has to do with the choice for women to get married. So I have found that most religions, countries, cultures, including America currently, they look at women and think of getting married as like the most important thing. The vast majority of music, movies, TV shows, books are all focused on romantic love. And I just find even people who are atheists, have no religion at all, hate Christianity, when thinking of women, they just place such a huge emphasis on marriage. People just think about it all the time. It's seen as weird if a woman is not in a relationship with someone. They think like something's wrong with her. And in Catholicism, you never have to get married. Literally think of Disney, which every girl grows up with. The entire point of it is finding your prince, finding your forever. Women are just taught, I feel like, from a very, very young age that marriage is the most important thing, and it's through so many parts of our culture. It is not just coming from religion, it's coming from everywhere. And an example of this is at my college freshman year, we're 18 years old, we're not dating anyone. The women in my dorm were showing me their Pinterest boards they made in high school, and they had a Pinterest board of wedding inspiration for a future wedding. As a teenager, these women are thinking about, dreaming about what their wedding is going to look like in the future. But Catholicism is so different. In Catholicism, it is seen as a beautiful decision to stay single. That's an amazing thing, to choose to never get married and to not have kids. You could become a nun, or you could just live as a single woman. That's seen as an amazing decision, and it's actually seen as even better than getting married. Becoming a nun, being single for the rest of your life, never getting married, not having kids, is seen in Catholic theology as better than getting married. And I think that is so radical and so incredible because this theology goes back thousands of years. In Catholicism, the norm for centuries and centuries is you don't have to rely on a husband, you don't have to find a man, you don't have to get married. And I think that's so cool, and it's even embedded into the way we define marriage. So to get married in Catholicism, it is not seen as a valid marriage if the woman and the man are not fully consenting to getting married, which is so radical because some of the major religions in the world have forced, coerced arranged marriages. And I want to be clear, because some arranged marriages, it's called an arranged marriage, but the woman is consenting to it. The couple is consenting and choosing. So I want to make a big distinction. I'm not saying all arranged marriage is forced and coerced, but in many countries, cultures, religions today, a coerced type of marriage is really embedded into the countries, cultures, religions. Forced marriages and have child marriages, it's really common in many countries in the world. And in Catholicism, it's not considered a real marriage if you're not fully consenting, freely consenting, freely coming into the marriage. And before my husband and I got married, we had a Catholic wedding, and we had to have two people in each of our lives fill out a form and basically vow that we are freely entering into this relationship, that we are freely entering into the marriage, that nothing physically, emotionally, financially is coercing us into getting married. And I think the way Catholicism has that option to stay single your entire life and or to become a nun, it gives an even greater value to the free choice of getting married, because you can also choose to not get married. Number two, Catholic women do not have to worry about unplanned pregnancies because we save sex for marriage. So this is the most common one where people will say that Catholicism does not give women bodily autonomy because they say, because we're against terminating pregnancies, you're going to be forced into a pregnancy, forced into giving birth, forced into becoming a mom. But it's because people are only looking at that one part of Catholicism, pro-life, and they're not looking at it with the understanding of the full theology of Catholic sexuality, which also is that sex is only in marriage. So for me, both my husband and I saved sex for marriage. We dated for 5 years without having sex. And so all throughout my time in high school, college, early 20s, mid 20s, I never had to worry about an unplanned pregnancy because I was not having sex. And I wasn't Catholic until I was 23. Before that, I was Protestant, and my belief as a Protestant was also to save sex for marriage. When I was converting into Catholicism, I educated myself on birth control and abortion because my views were changing on those issues a lot. And I was actually really shocked to learn about the effectiveness of birth control. When you look at typical use of how average people use it, the birth control pill is only 93% effective, condoms are less than 90% effective, and so the most common forms of contraception and birth control do lead to a lot of unplanned pregnancies. So it's a huge thing that a lot of women who are in committed relationships and having sex or hookups, either way, a lot of women think about unplanned pregnancies and that possibility. And that's why the abortion issue is so intense and controversial, because so many women have been in that situation where their period has been late, where contraception hasn't worked, and so many women know other women who have dealt with that. But if you look at Catholicism as a whole and like the full view of Catholic sexual ethics, women who are following the church's teachings are not dealing with that worry about an unplanned pregnancy because we're saving sex for marriage and only having sex with someone who we are excited to start a family with. And that has given me so much bodily autonomy, not having to have an unplanned pregnancy or a child before I'm ready. I am currently 4.5 months pregnant with my first child. We're having a daughter, and this was planned. We'd been married for a year, and then the first month that we had sex in my fertile window is when I got pregnant. And I have had a horrible first trimester. I was sick every moment I was awake. I threw up almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I would throw up water. I was super dehydrated, starving, debilitating exhaustion and fatigue. I like quit posting on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok for like 2 months because I was so sick. It was miserable. It was like one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life. Pregnancy has been so hard. And so looking back on all the years when I was celibate and not sexually active, it honestly gives me so much more clarity and gratefulness for the Catholic theology, because I am so grateful that I chose this. And it was not something that was forced on me because I was having sex with someone who I was not ready to start a family with. Number 3 has to do with how unplanned pregnancies many times create a pressure to get married to someone who you otherwise may not have married. So in the United States, 49% of pregnancies are unplanned. I'm gonna say that again. 49% of pregnancies are unplanned. Most of these cases have to do with sex outside of a marriage relationship, and many times a couple who's dating, who has an unplanned pregnancy, will get married because they're facing the unplanned pregnancy. Many times it creates this added pressure to where they probably would not have gotten married then or ever if they weren't facing an unplanned pregnancy and having a child together. And I think in that situation, it is coming from a really good place to want to get married when having a child, because you want that child to grow up with both their parents in a stable home. So I think people who get married when they face an unplanned pregnancy, that's coming from like a really beautiful, genuine, loving place. But many times those relationships do not last. And actually, couples who save sex for marriage only have a 5% chance of divorce. And a huge reason why it's at 5% chance of divorce when the national average is like way higher is because when I married my husband, we dated for 5 years, and having a child together before that was not a reason that we got engaged or got married. It was simply thinking about our compatibility, our values, our personality types, what we're wanting to get out of life. That was the only deciding factors into our marriage. But if a couple's having sex before marriage and has an unplanned pregnancy, a lot of times that adds this like subliminal or direct pressure to get married, and many times those relationships will not last long term. Marriage is such an extreme commitment, and the fact that Catholicism teaches to not have sex before marriage so you won't be dealing with an unplanned pregnancy, and then you are more free to commit to a marriage. I think that brings about so much more bodily autonomy for women, and of course it is so much better for the children too. For children growing up with parents who are living apart and divorced, it can be so traumatic growing up in that environment and just having to see your parents' relationship end when you're so young. And so the entire Catholic view of saving sex for marriage, defining marriage as a husband and a wife, and seeing a huge core part of marriage as having children, all of that is set up to create an environment where children are growing up in a home with both of their parents, in a loving, stable home with both their parents, and that's ultimately what God wants. Number 4, the last one, not using birth control brings Catholic women more bodily autonomy. So this one might seem so backwards if you don't know about fertility tracking. Catholic couples do something called natural family planning, and you might have seen some of your favorite influencers talking about this topic even if they're not religious, because a lot of people have been doing cycle tracking with taking body temperature every morning, but Catholics have been doing this since like the 1970s, where we use body temperature, cervical mucus, and urine tests to track for luteinizing hormone and estrogen. And we use these indicators to find our fertile window, and then we don't have sex with our husband for about a week out of every month during that fertile window. And through practicing celibacy during that time, you're able to prevent pregnancy. And the Catholic methods of symptothermal method, which is temperature and cervical mucus, and Marquette method, which is what I use, where we do urine tests to track luteinizing hormone and estrogen, both of these ways of tracking fertility are 99.5% effective at preventing pregnancy, which is huge because the birth control pill is only 93% effective. Condoms, less than 90% effective. IUDs are up there at 99% effective. So tracking fertility through the Catholic way of natural family planning is like as effective as an IUD at preventing pregnancy. But this is just such an amazing thing because, like I said, I've had a very painful, difficult pregnancy. It's been so hard. It gives me so much peace knowing that after I give birth to my daughter, I still have this 99.5 effectiveness of not getting pregnant again until I'm healed physically and mentally and we're ready to have another child. So it just brings me so much peace going through such a hard pregnancy, knowing that I'm not going to be forced into getting pregnant again really fast. And I think a lot of non-Catholics see the Catholic theology against birth control and contraception and see it as women don't have bodily autonomy, women are forced into getting pregnant, and that's honestly not the case at all. So those were my 4 reasons of how Catholicism brings more bodily autonomy to women. And like I said from the beginning, you have to understand all of the theology around sexuality as a whole to understand how it brings about bodily autonomy. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!